We're going to hear from another wonderful speaker here next. Last week in our series on this one question series, we heard from John Mark Walker on the topic of racism and what we as Christians can do to respond to that. And we have another big one to talk about here tonight from our friend Tim Norman, and he's going to be tackling the question of what is the purpose of life. So a nice, good luck with that, Tim. Thank you for joining us and talking to us with that. Just a couple of fun facts about Tim before he gets started. He has his master's in divinity as well as a PhD, and he lives in Texas with. He has an oldest daughter who is a freshman in college, and 2 weeks ago he taught some staff from South Asia for 6 days from local Eastern time, 9 p.m. till 1 a.m. For 6 days to help out with our crew friends in South Asia. So Tim, thank you for all that you have already done, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you tonight. So let's welcome up Tim.
Thanks so much. It's really great to join with you guys there in Pitt. I know you got some Carnegie Mellon folks too. Hats off to you to be taking a little break from your studies. And I know it's been a crazy year. I'll show some pictures here in a second, but yeah, I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. So which I'm not from this area of the world. In fact, I grew up outside Cincinnati and went to Ohio State. Worked as a software developer for a few years, and then came on staff with Crew a long time ago. So I know that you guys have been getting to know Dan Davis and Alicia some this year as they've moved in to help serve with Crew. I've met Dan and Alicia over 20 years ago. Met Alicia on a spring break trip I think when she was maybe a first or second year student at Ohio State, and met Dan when he was in his third year at Ohio State. So really proud to know that they're there. Wanted to come alongside you, help you take steps forward. Well, let me go ahead here and I'll pop up some slides. Yes, I did do this thing on I did teach a graduate class last week in South Asia from what was down here 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning, which I think for you guys is was that even 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So totally crazy. So it's nice to join you guys a little earlier in the evening. Of course, in the midst of this pandemic stuff, my office here, which is my home office. I've done a ton of stuff in this room. Maybe you can empathize. You've done a ton of things in your room. So I have Tammy and I have been married for almost 25 years, and we have 4 kids. And so I've watched them walk through the challenge. So all the way from Ava is a student at the University of Texas. Elena is a high school senior, so walking through the craziness of high school senior world in the midst of this, on her way to Baylor next fall. So then I have a couple of middle schoolers. So I've watched them work through the challenge of online school and lots of cancellations. And so I know what a lot of you guys have been through. And really encouraged to know that you're continuing to step in and even make time like this to continue to either grow in your faith, or maybe for you, maybe you're exploring your faith. All right, we're talking about the purpose of life, and purpose of life is a big question that people have been asking for a long time. And this is one of the texts that talks about at least one alternative to the purpose of life. This comes from the Book of the Dead. It's an ancient, Egyptian script. If I remember correctly, I think it was written around in the 12th century. And I've seen this one in the museum in Berlin a few times when I've been there. And so the way this goes is that after the guy's died, he has his liver gets weighed, not the heart, but the liver. That's where they really thought the real life was. And you weigh the liver, and you weigh it compared to a feather. And if your liver's as light as a feather, which means you've done some good things, then you make it and you keep proceeding in the game. If you don't make it, and your liver, if you've done some pretty bad things and your liver is heavier than the feather, then Onibus and Todd are all doing their work there. They grab the liver and they toss it to this awful creature. I forget the creature's name, but it is part hippopotamus, part lion, part crocodile. And that's where you end. So purpose of life, one is to make it through the game and not get fed to the hippopotamus, lion, crocodile guy. So figuring out the purpose of life has been a question that people have been asking for a very, very long time. In fact, this is one that you see that a little bigger. Yes, I didn't realize if I rotated it, rotates for you guys. This is what Rabbi Abram Heschel says. It's not enough for me to be able to say I am. I want to know who I am and in relation to who I live. It's not enough for me to ask questions. I want to know how to answer the one question that seems to encompass everything else. What am I here for? And I know that you're looking at lots of questions while you're a student. That's a great time to be asking questions. It was definitely a time for me to ask some major questions in life. And as you're exploring your major, you're asking lots of great questions. And maybe for some of you, it's like, what's my mission in life? What's my purpose? And what I'm going to talk to you tonight is a little bit of a paradigm about how people look at the world. And so we're going to talk about two major ways that we can look at the world and how that pushes us toward understanding the purpose of life. So this is just going to come up real quickly. This probably isn't as hard as what's what was it, 7/8 of 13? It's probably not as hard as that question. But this is just first, when you first see this, what does it say? So maybe drop in the chat and just say, hey, this is not what you wish it said. So like when you first looked at it, what did you think it said? Because there's two ways to look at this. Either we look and we see that God is nowhere, or we look and we see that God is now here. And obviously this is just a little word puzzle, and this wouldn't work in every language in the world for sure. But for us, we look at this, and how someone looks at this question has a significant impact on how they see their purpose of life. And ultimately, the true answer to this question greatly impacts the answer to our purpose in life. So, like I said, computer science engineer, then I went on, I have a PhD in New Testament studies, so I'm not an artist. So this is the best I could do, sketching some things out on my iPad. But there's kind of two big ways that we can look at this. God is nowhere. That there's people, we're in this world, and there's a closed system that's around us. That the driving factors are just either the chemicals or chances. That there's maybe even like some kind of strict determinism because of something that there's nothing outside interacting with us. There's nothing outside the system. And even likely inside that there's something in the system that even drives our determination into what we do. Now, God is now here, that there's a world we live in, but there's an engagement. And this is very oversimplified. I mean, even with each one of these, with these two systems, there's a wide range of, there would be a wide spectrum of how one could describe this. For our purposes tonight, I'm going to oversimplify and kind of talk about these two. So with this God is now here, we're talking about the God of the Bible, that there is a God who is infinite, who is able to interact in and outside of time, who is personal. And so there's some ability to be able to relate to him. He's not just a force. It's not just there's something out there, but also different than maybe kind of something maybe called deism. It's not like God was out there and just made something and then just kind of went hands off. And this God is now here. He's actually engaged in in the flow of human history, engaging in time and space. So I just talk a little bit of, obviously we have 20 minutes or so to kind of sketch out this. So I'm just going to hit some high points. I'm going to give you a few examples of people who say that God is nowhere. And these are no straw man arguments. I'm trying to show you, even these are some of either leading philosophers or leading scientists that said, hey, God is nowhere. And here's how I think that shapes the purpose of life. Kai Nielsen is one of the sharpest, in his time was one of the sharpest North American atheist philosophers. And in an address that he had to the American Philosophical Quarterly, he said, "We have not been able to show that reason requires the moral point of view, or that all really rational persons unhoodwinked by myth or ideology need not be individual egoist or classical amoralist. Reason doesn't decide here. The picture I painted for you is not a pleasant one. Reflection on it depresses me. Pure practical reason, even with good knowledge of facts, will not take you to morality." So, what Kai Nielsen is saying there is like, when I look, there's really nothing. If I say God is nowhere, I can't actually move from that through a reasoned argument to say this is how someone should live, that here's the morality. There's no good reason that people shouldn't just be absolutely egotistical, or just kind of put your hands up and say there really is no morality. Now, obviously, there's other atheists would say it slightly differently, but this is what Kai Nielsen had said. Now, some think that the purpose of life is, as we understand science better, then that's really going to unlock what the purpose of life is. So these are two famous guys, Francis Crick and Thomas Watson, the discoverers of the double helix. That's what they're standing next to. So these are the guys that kind of discovered DNA. So they got to a point where they understood more about the human person than anyone in science had at any point up until that point, and really unlocked, for the last, 40 to 50, the last 50 years, and even with folks like Francis Collin working the Human Genome Project, people have been delving into the DNA to unlock mysteries. But knowing what doesn't always lead you to know why. So here's one of the things that Thomas Watson said. He was being interviewed. He was very free to share his opinion, which was, in his system, was well reasoned. But he was being asked about some situations and about political situations in Africa. And he held a pessimistic view that political situations in Africa could improve because, this is him, this is his statement, there's no firm reason to anticipate that the intellectual capacities of peoples geographically separated in their evolution should prove to have evolved identically. Our wanting to reserve equal powers of reason as some universal heritage of humanity will not be enough to make it so. So what does Thomas Watson say? Well, this is an example where his God is nowhere worldview has led him to say there are actually some forms of racism that would be acceptable because it actually makes sense with what he felt was the scientific data and the overall narrative that he lived in. So there's an example that even though he knew about the DNA, his why or how should we really live, I would say is pretty concerning. And hopefully, even as you listened last week, at times, atheistic science has actually been one of the perpetrators toward some pretty extreme views in racism. I know that's not the way the story is often told, but that's actually history. Francis Crick wrote a paper on why I study biology. And in 1971, he said this. He said, there's a general feeling that if we're all nice to each other and if everybody has 2.3 children, everything's going to pan out. But I don't think that's true. And he goes on to give some reason. He said, some group of people should decide that some people should have more children and some people have fewer. You have to decide who is to be born. So here you have Why do I study biology? What's my purpose in biology? Is like why I need to determine who's going to be born. Because again, in his system, God is nowhere. Now he and his, as the champion of science, is now in an authority place to even determine who's even has the right to be born. So hopefully those are a little rattling. I mean, that's probably not what everyone, that's not what every kind of atheist thinks. But these are a few examples of atheists who have said, hey, my God is nowhere worldview, this is how that actually gets played out. Another philosopher, L.D. LaRue, was addressing philosophy, a group of philosophers as well. And he talked about the need for a noble lie. He said, it's a lie because it tells us that the universe is infused with value, which is a great fiction, because it makes a claim to universal truth when there is none, and because it tells us not to live for self-interest, which is evidently false. But without such lies, we cannot live. And so his encouragement to this group of philosophers was, you need to embrace the noble lie to give yourself purpose in life. Because there's really no good reason that we can't actually live and function in a real way. Like, why do relationships really matter? Why should I not just be out for me? He's like, the noble lie is actually going to be the best way. So even though God is nowhere, it's actually better to tell yourself maybe some lie to help you continue to move forward. And this shows up in all kinds of, I gave you some examples from science and philosophy, but you can even see how this shows up in things like art. This is Jackson Pollock with his self-portrait in the back. So this is how his worldview of God is nowhere shows up in his art. There are musicians like John Cage, who it showed up in his music, where he would choose, if life's really truly driven by, in this God is nowhere worldview, then if life is driven by random chance, then my music should be driven by random chance. And he would come up with different systems to, I mean, this is oversimplifying, but basically flip a coin to decide what's the next note that he should play or write. And of course, the music is going to be chaotic, but that was that's him, bringing his worldview into full expression. Well, let's talk a little bit about God is now here. And in that system, what would be a purpose to life? The Apostle Paul stands on what's called Mars Hill. I stood there a few years ago. My family, we were part of leading a summer mission with Crew in Thessaloniki, Greece, and went down to Athens and stood where Paul had spoken. And to a group of people there, he said, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. He marked out all their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own prophets have said. We are his offspring. Now, he goes on to even talk about the reality that because of his wanting people to know him, that at a point in history that he sends his son, who is actually risen from the dead, to bear witness of God's serious intentionality to make himself known and for people to find him. So this is a passage where it says, that God has created all people, that he gives and sustains life. So this is definitely God is now here. He's engaging. He didn't just create it, but he's actually involved in the here and now. Back to even your conversation about racism, this is one of the great passages that from one man he made all the nations. That there's a common humanity, very different than what Thomas Watson was talking about. There is a common humanity and a common brotherhood. It even says he's put people in the very times and places that they are. I mean, even in your own life, like you're a student at Pittsburgh, you're a student at Pitt, you're a student at Carnegie Mellon, and he's actually like in some way like God has been involved in that decision taking place. But it says he actually did this for a purpose. He did it so that you would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him, even though he's not far away from us. Like this passage is saying that one of the real purpose in life is to actually know God, to experience him, because he's not just a force. We see that he's, personal and infinite. So we're able to have a relationship with him. In fact, well, this is really one of the amazing things. I mentioned I taught a class in South Asia last week, and it was on the Gospel of John. And in the Gospel of John, there's a couple of things I would want to just highlight with you. In John chapter 17, there's this great interaction between Jesus and his Father as he's praying just before he's going to be betrayed and crucified. And he talks about the relationship of love they've had since before the creation of the world. See, one of the amazing things even about the Christianity is that that relationship and love has actually been an eternal part of the entire system, even before the universe, because God in himself, and Father, Son, Spirit, has this love relationship. And so relationships are at the very core and fabric of the very universe. It isn't something that was added in someday. Relationship has been something that has always been there. And I think that, isn't it interesting to think that relationships feel so important to us and they feel so significant? The loss of a relationship hurts. The gaining of a new relationship, it's exciting. And relationships are not something that's been added. They're not just kind of this chance function basically because we've been locked in this inner system. It's actually with the very universe, the fabric of the very universe. It says that you were created to know God. In fact, in that same John 17 chapter that I was mentioning, that it says that Jesus says, this is eternal life, that they would know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. Actually, Jesus would say that what life is really about, real life, is about knowing God in a real way. And so when we talk about the purpose of life, that one that actually makes sense, I think one of the things that really makes sense is that we've actually been created for a relationship, been created to relate rightly with God. And even as we're hearing the testimony earlier, that comes through knowing Jesus and being transformed by him. And that even as you've talked in some of your other sessions, that actually then has an implication on our relationships with others. This is just a quote from C.S. Lewis, and it comes after a section that he's talking about different appetites that we have. He says, just before this quote, he says, hunger does not prove, I'm flipping around, you get motion sickness there. Hunger does not prove that we have food. One could be hungry and die of starvation on a raft at sea. But hunger does prove that we come from a race that does need food and inhabit a world where edible substances exist. In the same way, though I do not believe that my desire for paradise or my desire for the eternal life proves that I shall enjoy it, I think it's pretty good indication that such a thing exists and that some men will. A man may love a woman and not win her, but it would be very odd if the phenomenon called falling in love occurred in a sexless world. So even here, C.S. Lewis saying, like, even our desire, like back to the old Book of the Dead, like we want to get to some kind of eternal state. And we want to get to some kind of even eternal good place. And C.S. Lewis says, the fact that hunger is in us is a very likely indication that exists and is what we were created for. Well, I'd love to give you guys a little bit of space to do some Q&A. If you want to, maybe I should even mention that along the way, but if you want to type out a few questions in the chat, and maybe if we've got an MC that wants to, if a few show up, maybe choose one for me. And if there's no questions, totally fine. I can end us in prayer. Those interested in this topic, great question. I would say a couple things. One, I do really love, and I continue to love, C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity is one. In fact, if you're more on the science side, Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, like this is Dr. Fauci's boss, and he was a total atheist, like real deal atheist. Grew up in a family with no religion at all. Got his PhD and then got his MD, and along the way, he made a journey to faith. And actually, the very first chapter just talks about that journey. Very well worth it. But in his story, he actually talks about reading C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. So I would suggest Mere Christianity. There's another really good book by a guy named William Lane Craig, and he's one of the top apologists in the world. Apologist just means the kind of person that answers hard Christian questions. He's one of the top debaters about the resurrection or does God exist. And he has a book called Reasonable Faith. In the first couple of chapters, he addresses this topic. In fact, one of the chapters is, I think chapter 2 is called The Absurdity of Life Without God or in Immortality. And has some very great things. But also these kind of things, like you can feel free to email me or reach out to me, Instagram, something like that. I've got a few books, I've read a few, and so I'll be glad to make a suggestion. How does this play out as I make specific decisions about my future? Well, so the question, how does this play out as I make specific decisions about my future? Well, one, it's like God is involved in your life. He's not just like he just started, that he just got things kickstarted and then just let us all kind of play the game. He's actually involved, which is really awesome that he's there engaged in your life, wanting to give you guidance, wanting to give you input, wanting to put up a road sign every once in a while and go, hey, danger, there's curves ahead. You should really slow down. So that's one of the things. Also, if this is the purpose of life, then there's a whole lot of people out there that are experiencing something that's less than what they were created for. And this is one of the things that as we move and become the kind of people that share the gospel with folks and engage with them, that's why it's good news. We're not trying to tell people about how wrong they are, all the mistakes. It's like, really, it's like you've been created to actually know and experience God in a real and profound way that would actually satisfy some of the deepest hungers that you have. And that's what we're sharing with people. So we're helping in that journey, like we're helping them get to the right location, because we're all on a journey. I mean, it's like, it's even like Odysseus. I mean, we're all, everybody's got some kind of journey going on, but we want to make sure you end up in the right location, in the right destination, and on target. Good question. All right, well, let me pray for us, and then we can transition to your next step. Father, thanks so much for this opportunity to just meet with some great students at Pitt and Carnegie Mellon. And goodness, I mean, I certainly, a situation like this, would have loved to have sat down, had some coffee, hear some stories, answer some questions. And I know in this crazy world that we're in, these are the kinds of interactions that we're limited to at times. So I pray, even as they go into the rest of the year, that you would give them guidance in their own studies, that you would even help put people in their pathway who are looking for purpose. In your name we pray. Amen.